Hello and welcome to Learn Danish Now 365. My name is the Nordic Educator. I will guide you through the Danish language, step by step, calmly and clearly. Let's begin with some common Danish verbs. At K, slang, to mess up, to blunder. At kalde, to call, to name. At kaste, to throw. At kede, to be bored. At kende, to know, a person or something familiar. At kigge, to look, to glance. At klage, to complain. At klare, to manage, to handle. At klatre, to climb. At klippe, to cut, to trim. At klinge, to sound, to ring. At knuse, to crush, to break. At knække, to crack, to snap. At komme, to come. At kontrollere, to control, to check. At koste, to cost. At køre, to drive, to ride. At købe, to buy. At køle, to cool. At kysse, to kiss. At klappe, to clap, to pat. At klare sig, to cope, to get by. At klæde, to dress, to suit. At klippe hår, to cut hair. At knække sammen, to break down emotionally. At knurre, to growl. At koncentrere sig, to concentrate. At kommunikere, to communicate. At kommentere, to comment. At kombinere, to combine. At kompensere, to compensate. At konstruere, to construct, to build. At kontakte, to contact. At kopiere, to copy. At korrespondere, to correspond. At korrigere, to correct. At koste på sig, to afford, to spend on oneself. At kramme, to hug, to embrace. At kravle, to crawl, to creep. At kræve, to demand. At krybe, to crawl, to creep. At krydse, to cross. At kysse på kinden, to kiss on the cheek. At kende til, to be familiar with, to know about. At kende forskel på, to tell the difference between. At kende igen, to recognize. At klæbe, to stick, to adhere. At koge, to boil, to cook. At kontrollere igen, to double check. At køre væk, to drive away. At køre ind, to drive in. At køre for hurtigt, to drive too fast. At kæmpe, to fight, to struggle. At kæle, to caress, to cuddle. At kvæle, to strangle, to suffocate. At kvæde, poetic, to chant, to recite. At kyndige sig, rare, to be skilled, to be competent. At kunne, to be able, can. At kaste op, to vomit, to throw up. At kende nogen godt, to know someone well. Learning Danish is not about perfection. It's about practice, patience, and progress. Keep listening, keep repeating. You're building not just words, but confidence. Thank you for learning with Learn Danish Now 365. Let's continue this journey, one word at a time.